There was no way this bakery could have known who this officer was when they changed certain words on his cake. The blood boiled in Powell's veins as he looked down at his cake. He wouldn't take a blatant insult to his profession lying down. And what he was seeing wasn't just an accident. They would regret making an enemy of him by this bakery. The majority of Jake Powell's adult life had been spent as an officer with the Newark Police Department, and he had never regretted joining the department. Although he loved the force, his time with it was sadly coming to an end. He was about to retire after so many years, and everyone wanted to thank him for his hard work. However, things didn't go as planned. The first day Powell walked into the Newark Police Academy, he knew it was his calling. He was 25 years old. While patrolling the streets and ensuring the safety of the citizens were important to him, he wanted to do more. It was Powell's dream to make his dream come true, and he was determined to achieve it. Since he was a child, Officer Powell had dreamed of joining the forensics department. Despite the fact that such responsibility did not come easily, he was determined to do all he could to fulfill it. The dream of Officer Powell became reality within a few years. In addition to working his way up in the force, he also gained experience in forensics. In time, he worked his way up the ranks and landed the job he had on that day. 5 years had passed, and another 10 had passed before he knew it. In spite of this, Officer Powell loved his job, so each year was a treasured memory. His efforts during that time led to the capture of hundreds of criminals and the bringing of justice to the families of the victims. It never occurred to him that he would be the one to bring justice to a bakery. Officer Powell had been with the force for 25 years at the time of the incident. As he approached retirement, his colleagues decided to show him their appreciation for everything he had done for the city. Although he tried to play it down, the other officers wanted to celebrate his time with them. The gathering wasn't going to be small either. Officer Powell was one of the department's oldest officers. Several of them relied on him when they faced a difficult case because he taught them everything they knew. During his lifetime, he had been a pillar of strength, and they wanted his departure to be one he would never forget. Each person chose a task for the big day, and they set out to accomplish it over the next few weeks. Powell was assigned the task of arranging the cake, and he was happy to do so. He didn't want any old cake for such a special occasion. As far as he was concerned, he had the perfect idea that everyone would relate to. As soon as Officer Powell finished his shift, he headed down to his favorite bakery. A picture of what he wanted on the cake was presented to them to see if they would be up for the task. Due to the recent sale of the bakery, Officer Powell was a bit nervous, but the new owners assured him that the cake would be as he requested. He would have gone somewhere else if he knew the truth. It didn't take long for Officer Powell to realize that the big celebration was just around the corner. It was an exciting morning in the office, and everyone made sure they kept their schedules so they could be present when the time came. As Officer Powell observed the fuss around him, he felt as though he was graduating again. Although, once he saw the cake, his joy quickly faded. By 3:45 p.m., everything was set up and ready for the party to begin at 4:30 p.m. It was up to Officer Powell to finish the task of collecting the cake and bringing it back to the station as soon as the first shift finished. Officer Powell was distracted by a new case. It was already 4:15 p.m. when someone reminded him about the cake. After grabbing his jacket, Officer Powell ran to his car. Upon his return, everyone would be waiting, so he had no time to waste. His hurried entry into the bakery was followed by his payment for the cake and his rush out without checking what he had been given. A crucial detail would soon become apparent to him. Everyone was waiting for Officer Powell when he returned to the office. His biggest cases were discussed before they congratulated him on his service and retirement. Despite a great atmosphere surrounding everyone in attendance, the moment they opened the cake box, it all changed. Someone suggested cutting the cake to Officer Powell, who was having a blast. He eagerly opened the lid of the big box when it was placed on the table in front of him. A disgusted look crossed his face as he stared down at the cake. Everything he asked for was there, and it looked nice too. But something had changed about his instructions, and he got irritated. Upon seeing the cake, each and every officer in attendance let out a stunned gasp. In the same way that Officer Powell was stunned, they couldn't comprehend how anyone could do such a thing. What kind of person would ruin a man's retirement party by saying such nasty things? Why were people so riled up about this issue? Well, Officer Powell had asked the bakery to include the words honor, integrity, and commitment at the bottom, but that wasn't what it said. The Newark police badge was slashed with the words bribery, corruption, and murder instead of honoring his request. It was an insult unlike any other. While reading the words repeatedly, Officer Powell's blood was boiling. What kind of person would do such a thing? Not only that, but on such an important day as well. The team wanted nothing more than to have fun for a while. It was ruined by the bakery. Officer Powell wanted to know if they did it deliberately. It was evident to Officer Powell that his team felt just as bad as he did about the whole incident. Moments ago, their faces were filled with joy, but now there was displeasure instead. Better than that would have been appreciated. The hard work they put in deserved to be appreciated. His team walked out of the office with slumped shoulders as Officer Powell watched. The party was ruined, so they might as well get back to work. This was not something Officer Powell wanted to see. It was important to him that they had a good time that day. Despite his best efforts, things didn't turn out as planned, and he blamed himself. The incident deeply hurt Officer Powell. This day had been anticipated for weeks, but ended in tragedy. Such an action would not be tolerated by him. If Officer Powell could get to the bottom of the cake mishap, then those responsible would be held accountable. He would ensure that. After grabbing the cake, Officer Powell went back to the bakery. There was a need for an explanation, and he wanted it as soon as possible. It was important for him to explain this to his team. The purpose of this is to let them know that it was only a simple mistake and that they could continue their party. It turned out he got much more than he bargained for when he arrived at the bakery. Upon arriving at the bakery, Officer Powell slammed the cake down on the counter and demanded an explanation. Unfortunately, he didn't receive the response he expected. He, however, received the complete opposite, which ultimately led him to act differently than he had ever imagined. Officer Powell's complaints went unanswered. Except for the customers, everyone in the bakery ignored him. Their opinions were divided in half. A few people sided with the officer, while others thought he needed to grow up and take the joke. How did the staff feel about all of this? Powell became more aggressive and louder, demanding to know who wrote what. He didn't care what the customers thought. Answers were all he wanted. A person stepped up and told him, in their opinion, police officers did not deserve better. They considered police officers a problem, not a solution. According to the man, police officers are just as bad as the criminals they arrest. In a state of shock, Officer Powell could not speak. It was the first time he had heard of such a thing. The man told him to leave the store, which shocked him even more. He didn't even try to be reasonable. Even though he was irritated with the man, Officer Powell requested a refund. Yet the man didn't feel he deserved that either. As for Officer Powell, he believed he was in the right and demanded a refund. Officer Powell was dragged to the door by the man, who grabbed him by the shirt. The 50-year-old was then pushed out of his shop. Customers who stood by the officer asked if he was all right after he had left the store. However, Officer Powell did not pay any attention to that. Having been thrown out of the party like a piece of trash didn't help him feel better about the party. To him, finding a peaceful solution was all that mattered. However, he didn't seem to have any luck. He hated the way he felt. Aside from that, he hated when people expressed strong opinions about things that simply weren't true. Despite that, he was not going to give up. Officer Powell could not help the bakery owner if that was his feelings. His money was due to him, so he wasn't stopping until he had it. After returning to his office, Officer Powell explained what had happened to his team. It was never his intention to insult anyone. It was just that he did not have enough time to check the cake before he left. He was told by everyone that they were just upset that people saw them in that way before he said it and tried to comfort him. The sight of his team so upset still made Officer Powell furious, so he had to act. What the bakery did would not be allowed to go unpunished. He no longer cared about getting his money back. The man had done something wrong, and he must get revenge, no matter what it takes. The new bakery owner had crossed so many lines that Officer Powell lost count. He ruined the man's favorite snack spot. He ruined the party, and he even went as far as to make the officer look like a fool. Unfortunately, he didn't know Officer Powell all too well. The officer was a calm man who could wait to exact his revenge. So when it came, it would be devastating, and there would be no turning back. That night, Officer Powell couldn't sleep. His need for revenge kept him awake, and the sadness on his team's faces just worsened the urge. He kept replaying the scene in his mind, hoping to find something he could use against the man who threw him out. At first, there was nothing, but as he drifted to sleep, Officer Powell got his answer. Officer Powell was in his office early the next morning. He had the idea, now he needed to find out if he had any grounds to stand on. He researched the matter and gathered as much information as he could get his hands on. It wasn't anything new, but every good officer knows that when it comes to conflict of interest, it is best to brush up on the rules before acting. After gathering all the information he thought would be useful, Officer Powell got in touch with a local lawyer and explained the case to him. The lawyer agreed that Officer Powell had the right to do what he intended to do and even offered to be the lead on the case. But Officer Powell wanted to make sure he was doing the right thing before he acted. Officer Powell was still furious with the man, and he knew that acting out of anger usually led to more problems further down the line. But after a few days of calming down and thinking it over, he decided that he was well within his rights, and he would proceed with opening a case against the bakery. It wasn't something he would usually do, but he felt that a lesson had to be learned. Officer Powell called the lawyer back and told him that he would require his assistance to open a case. The lawyer then proceeded to do just that. But what surprised everyone, including Officer Powell, was the charges the lawyer laid against the bakery. Hate crime, assault against a public official, and verbal assault were just some of the charges. A few months later, Officer Powell appeared in a court, and his lawyer presented all the evidence they had. This included images of the badge Officer Powell asked for, pictures of the cake he received, and the surveillance footage taken by the bakery's CCTV cameras on the day Officer Powell was thrown out. With so much evidence against the bakery, the case looked like a simple one, but the bakery had a trick or two up its sleeve. When the time came to make their verbal statements, Officer Powell told the judge exactly what had happened on that day. He never expected the bakery owner to tell the truth, but what he heard left him shaken. The bakery owner stated that he gave Officer Powell exactly what he ordered and that he could not be blamed for the words Officer Powell had chosen himself. He also claimed that he kicked Officer Powell out of the store because he threatened to arrest him. While the court was taking a break so that the judge could review the evidence, Officer Powell's lawyers informed him that the case could go either way. They had no evidence to prove that what the man said was incorrect, as the CCTV footage had no sound. So at this point, it was Officer Powell's word against that of the bakery owner. That was when the bakery owner said something he would come to regret. In an attempt to rile the officer up, the bakery owner taunted him, saying, "It will be a miracle if you win this case. My lawyers are ready to sweep the carpet with you." He had no idea he was being recorded, but it was a harsh fact he would learn once they appeared before the judge again. Once Officer Powell and his lawyers returned to the courtroom, his lawyers asked to have a new piece of evidence submitted to the judge. The bakery owner turned pale when the recording of his threats was heard by the judge, and Officer Powell could tell that he wasn't as confident anymore. This evidence was enough to break his case. The judge asked Officer Powell's lawyer to stop playing the recording and turned her attention to the bakery owner. From the look on her face, it was clear that she wasn't pleased with what she had heard. She asked the bakery owner if he wanted to defend himself, but his lawyer intervened and said that they didn't have anything to add to the case. With that, the judge reiterated what the case was about, and things weren't looking good for the bakery owner. The judge was already unhappy with the picture she saw of the cake, but it was the recorded threats that ultimately buried the man. If he had just kept quiet, there might have still been a chance. The judge decided that Officer Powell was well within his rights. She ordered the bakery to refund him his money and to issue a public apology to the police station. But she wasn't done yet. The judge also fined the bakery because of their actions. And it wasn't a low fine either. The amount that had to be paid was so high that the owner ended up declaring bankruptcy. Officer Powell was happy with the outcome, but deep in his heart, he was also disappointed. Things didn't have to go as far as they did. His favorite bakery didn't have to be closed down over one person's opinion. But it was, and all the memories Officer Powell had in that place seemed to disappear with it.